MMA referees do more than just raise the winner's hand at the end of a fight. They're also responsible for the safety of the fighters. But hey, they're only human, and sometimes they make some mistakes, like really bad ones. We're talking about errors that not only mess up the fight's result, but also put the fighters in danger. Stick with us as we go through the worst referee mistakes in MMA history. Straight into it, during the warm-up rounds of UFC 267 at the Etihad Arena in Abu Dhabi, things got controversial when MMA referee Vyacheslav Kiselev stole the show in a match between Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos and Benoit Saint-Denis. Just like some other bad MMA referee mistakes, it involved a rookie. Vyacheslav Kiselev was basically still a fresh face in the game and was tasked with handling the welterweight showdown between UFC regular Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos and newcomer Benoit Saint-Denis. It was Benoit Saint-Denis' debut match, but things got wild, and he ended up taking way more damage than he bargained for. As the fight went on from a closely contested first round, it became clear that the newcomer was struggling to keep up. Dos Santos started landing a bunch of punches and kicks on Saint-Denis, who could only try to protect himself. Despite this, Kiselev, the referee, decided to let the fight continue. Miraculously, the French fighter made it through the round, but the drama wasn't over yet. At the beginning of the third round, Dos Santos accidentally poked Saint-Denis in the eye. Although Kiselev paused the fight, he disregarded Saint-Denis' complaints about his vision and didn't even bring in a doctor to check on him. The MMA community was all over this, and even veteran referee John McCarthy didn't hold back, calling it the worst officiating he'd ever seen in a UFC match. Dana White wasted no time in moving the referee from the show after that terrible call. Mark Ratner, a UFC executive, swiftly replaced Kiselev with the seasoned Mark Goddard for the main card bout between Volkan Ozdemir and Magomed Ankalaev. Next up, Mario Yamasaki's ref mistake didn't just sideline him from the match, he got straight up blacklisted. Getting on Dana White and the UFC's blacklist is like the ultimate referee nightmare, and Yamasaki lived it. To be honest, Mario Yamasaki is quite a controversial character in MMA. He's infamous for his heart symbol gesture and for giving questionable calls. He's also known for letting fighters be warriors and often dragging fights on way longer than necessary, putting fighters at serious risk of unnecessary punishment and danger. Mario Yamasaki kicked off his officiating journey back in 2001, becoming one of the notable UFC referees alongside the legendary Big John McCarthy. He took his whistle to rings all over the world, making his mark by throwing up his heart symbol every time Bruce Buffer announced his name. But here's the thing, Mario Yamasaki making ref mistakes wasn't a one-time thing. In fact, he was quite known for them. Just take it what went down at UFC Fight Night in 2017. Back in 2017 at UFC Fight Night, Oklahoma, Michael Chiesa and Kevin Lee were in the spotlight, headlining the event. Mario had the crucial role as the third man in the ring for this highly anticipated match, but unfortunately, he made a historic blunder. Kevin Lee managed to lock in a Darcy choke, but Chiesa was defending it. Right in the midst of Chiesa's defense, Yamasaki jumped in and prematurely stopped the fight. Chiesa was furious, and the whole MMA community let Mario know he seriously messed up. Like we said, it wasn't a one-time thing. Back in his early days at UFC 70, Mario Yamasaki had a bit of a slip-up during a preliminary match. Sakara landed a solid right on Alimaki, causing him to turn and walk off. Yamasaki jumped in, and it seemed like Sakara had scored the win. But oops, turns out the ref was actually calling for a timeout, which he could legally not do. Mario had to restart the fight, and poor Alimaki got pummeled for another 10 seconds. Rough call. We could go on and on about Yamasaki's referee mistakes, but he's not the only one making blunders in MMA. Even though Herb Dean is widely regarded as one of the best MMA referees, he's had his ups and downs. Love him or not, he's been in the fight game the longest among MMA refs. While he's made some solid calls, he's also had his fair share of slip-ups. But hey, with all that experience under his belt, he's definitely seen it all in the Octagon. Herb Dean is an experienced mixed martial arts referee and former MMA fighter hailing from the United States. He officiated fights for various promotions, including the Ultimate Fighting Championship and ONE Championship. Regarded as the gold standard for MMA referees, Dean has earned praise from UFC president Dana White, color commentator Joe Rogan, and numerous publications like ESPN.com, Fox Sports, and more. Even though he's got loads of experience under his belt, there was this one time when his ref skills had everyone raising their eyebrows like, what just happened? UFC 235 had this mega-hyped fight that everyone was talking about before the event. But guess what? It ended up being even more talked about after, thanks to a seriously controversial stoppage. During a top-notch welterweight showdown on the main card, Ben Askren stepped into the Octagon for his UFC debut, securing a first-round submission victory over former champion Robbie Lawler. Herb Dean was right there at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas on March 2nd, overseeing Askren's highly anticipated debut against the former UFC welterweight champ Lawler. Askren managed to tough out an early onslaught from Lawler, which included a huge slam and a barrage of hard punches to the face. Askren eventually got back on his feet, broke away, and then dove back in to secure a takedown. Lawler tried to stand up but ended up exposing his back, giving Askren the opportunity to go for the rear naked choke. Lawler almost slipped away, but Askren smoothly transitioned into a bulldog choke position. Askren had Lawler locked in a bulldog choke, and then, depending on who you ask, Lawler either momentarily relaxed his arm or went limp. According to Dean, it was the latter, and that was enough for him to call off the fight, catching Lawler off guard. Lawler quickly jumped up, protesting before calmly discussing the situation with Dean. Replays revealed Lawler's right arm seemingly going limp, prompting Dean to check it before halting the fight a moment later. Askren was declared the winner by submission, but to a lot of people it didn't seem like Lawler had either passed out or tapped to Askren's bulldog choke. That stoppage at UFC 235 is probably going to be talked about for years. It's already shaping up to be one of the most controversial in UFC history. But Herb Dean stands by his decision, saying it was justified from where he was standing. And hey, speaking of early stoppage, we've got another referee who jumped the gun, and this time the referee is John McCarthy. Back on December 21st, 1997, in Yokohama, Japan, the UFC Ultimate Japan event saw the heavyweight tournament semi-finals heat up with Marcus Silveira facing off against Kazushi Sakuraba. The match started with a bang, with both fighters bringing the excitement right from the start, mixing it up on the ground, scrambling for position, and then getting back on their feet for more action. Marcus Silveira had Kazushi Sakuraba trapped up against the fence, landing some nice shots. However, Sakuraba had his hands raised the whole time and was trying to move his head to avoid some of the strikes. Sakuraba, the iconic Japanese wrestler, figured his best bet to break free from the fence was to go for a single leg takedown, a smart move. But just as he went for it, John McCarthy thought he was knocked out and called an end to the fight. It was a real downer because later on they ruled it a no contest because of the premature stoppage. After the no contest ruling, Sakuraba got another shot at Silveira in the same tournament and came out on top this time. While Herb Dean is like the MVP of referees, Steve Mazzagatti is kinda like, well, let's just say he's not exactly winning any awards in the ref department. Steve Mazzagatti was one of the most controversial figures during his time refereeing in mixed martial arts. With a string of questionable calls, he managed to rub many fighters, and even Dana White, the big boss at UFC, the wrong way. Dana White even called Mazzagatti as the worst referee in the history of any fight business. Yeah, he definitely had his fair share of blunders in the Octagon, one of which happened back in July 19th, 2008. In Las Vegas, there was this epic showdown at UFC Fight Night 14 between Anthony Johnson and Kevin Burns. But oh boy, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Burns decided to try some unconventional moves, throwing left palm strikes that ended up poking Johnson's eyes. Referee Steve Mazzagatti had to step in and give Burns a warning. But Burns didn't stop. He kept on poking Johnson in the eyes. Then, in the third round, Burns delivered a finger poke so intense that it forced the fight to come to a stop. Burns' strategy was as sneaky as it gets for the eyes and blind the opponent. Despite Mazzagatti's repeated warnings, he never took the drastic step of deducting a point or booting Burns from the match. And when Johnson was practically blind, another eye poke sealed the deal. Instead of sending Burns packing, Mazzagatti shocked everyone by declaring him the TKO winner. Imagine the crowd's reaction. Later, Johnson revealed the gruesome aftermath of those eye pokes. His retina was in terrible shape, possibly detached, and he had a gnarly laceration stretching from one end of his eye to the other. It took a solid 2 hours of laser surgery and some stitching up to try and fix the damage. That's one wild ride in the Octagon. But hey, karma had its say later on when Johnson got his chance at redemption in a rematch where he almost killed Burns. Let's just say Burns probably had a close encounter with regret after that one. And just to show another reason why Dana White probably called this guy the worst referee in the business, we're taking it back to the match between Jon Jones and Matt Hamill. The refereeing mess-up in the Jon Jones versus Matt Hamill fight is still a hot topic over 10 years later. Why? Well, it's the one and only time Jones tasted defeat in MMA, thanks to that debacle. Jones was facing his biggest challenger in the UFC, Matt Hamill, a skilled wrestler with killer boxing and winning skills. It was a showdown for the ages, forever tainted by that infamous referee mistake. Jones, flaunting the skills that later earned him the UFC light heavyweight crown, didn't hold back against Hamill's wrestling skills. He tossed him around like a ragdoll right from the get-go. Jones swiftly moved into full mount, and with Hamill trapped beneath him, he unleashed a barrage of vicious punches and elbows, slicing the hammer wide open. The match was practically done for, yet referee Steve Mazzagatti let Jones keep pounding on his opponent until he threw what seemed like an illegal downward elbow. Mazzagatti finally stepped in, taking a point from Jones for the foul. But the damage was done. Hamill was badly hurt. Despite knowing Hamill was deaf, Mazzagatti verbally asked if he could keep going. No surprise, Hamill didn't respond, leading Mazzagatti to call off the fight, seemingly favoring Jones. Believe it or not, when the official result was out, Mazzagatti had actually disqualified Bones. But here's the kicker. He believed it was the illegal elbows, not the brutal pounding before them, that made Hamill unable to continue. Calling this decision ridiculous would be putting it mildly. He should have stopped the fight the moment Hamill couldn't defend himself, and asking a deaf fighter if he could continue was a major oversight. This match should have been marked as a TKO victory for Jones. The fact that it's logged as a disqualification loss is a glaring testament to just how outrageous that refereeing mistake was. Even the best in the business make mistakes. Josh Rosenthal is not immune to that truth. On June 11, 2012, in San Jose, California, middleweights Mark Munoz and Chris Weidman took the spotlight at UFC on Fuel TV 4. Round 2 got pretty hot when Munoz took a brutal elbow from Weidman, sending him crashing into the canvas. Weidman pounced, snagging Munoz's back. Munoz was out cold, but Rosenthal seemed to be stuck in sloth mode, watching as Weidman unloaded a whopping 17 right-hand punches to Munoz's head, turning the canvas into a bloodbath before ref Josh Rosenthal finally stopped the mayhem. It was one heck of a dangerous late stoppage in MMA history. The entire sequence from start to finish took only about 8 seconds, but many felt Rosenthal could have stepped in much earlier to save Munoz from taking unanswered strikes. Count him among his own critics. However, Rosenthal isn't one to pretend that his mistakes don't exist. In an interview, Rosenthal straight up admitted that he was late in the stoppage. Looks like this next referee didn't just miss the mark with a late stoppage. They went in the opposite direction and called it too early. This is a classic case of MMA's golden rule. You can't stop a fight too soon or too late. It's got to be just right. But Eduardo Herdy seemed to have missed that memo. You know it's got to be a serious referee error when one of those sports commissions in charge of the UFC steps in to overturn a result and call it a no contest. But that's exactly what went down in the showdown between Leandro Silva and Drew Dober at UFC Fight Night 62. The referee for the bout was Eduardo Herdy, a Brazilian official who hadn't seen much action in the UFC before this. And let's just say, based on his performance in this fight, it was pretty clear why he wasn't a regular in the Octagon. In the second round, following a tight first one, Silva managed to bring Dober down and went for a guillotine choke in the ensuing scramble. However, the hold didn't seem to be locking in tight, and Dober swiftly transitioned into Silva's half guard, working to break free from the hold. Incredibly though, just as Dober appeared to have popped his head free, Hardy stepped in to call off the fight, apparently believing that Silva had choked his foe unconscious. As Dober slipped out of the choke, referee Eduardo Hardy stepped in and waved off the fight, calling it a win for Silva, leaving both fighters confused. The result of the bout was later changed to a no contest. Dober was pretty upset once he caught on to what went down. How Hardy thought he had knocked out was beyond anyone's guess, because Dober was still moving around and there wasn't even a hint of a tap out. Up next is none other than the referee, who many love to hate in the MMA world, Cecil Peoples. This dude, known for his wild moves and questionable calls, was a regular on the Bellator scene. But he isn't just known for his questionable refereeing. He's also making waves as a ringside judge in the UFC. But let's just say that his track record in both gigs isn't winning him any popularity contests in the MMA world. Whether he's making questionable calls from the sidelines or causing chaos in the ring, Peoples seems to have a knack for rubbing fans and fighters the wrong way. It's safe to say he's not exactly everyone's favorite referee or judge. Peoples' refereeing style is like something out of a movie. It just doesn't quite ring true. During the Daniel Cormier versus Tony Johnson bout, instead of a straightforward signal to start the fight, Peoples busted out some bizarre karate chop-infused move that left everyone in the audience scratching their heads. It's moments like these that make you wonder if he's trying a bit too hard to stand out in the cage. He also tried mightily to have a signature phrase, just like John McCarthy with his "Let's dance" catchphrase. But let's be real, it's a bit out of place for an MMA showdown. And let's not forget his track record for botched calls. Take the Owen Rubio versus Mike Gonzalez fight. Missing that Rubio tapped. Gonzalez thought that he submitted and released the hold, but since Peoples did not intervene, the bout continued. Rubio got a second wind and won, thanks to Peoples' mistakes. Whether he's making strange catchphrases for messing up calls left and right, Peoples has certainly ruffled some feathers in the MMA community. It's no wonder he's more enemies than friends in the sport. Moving on, Dana White doesn't hold back when it comes to calling out referees, and Todd Anderson found himself on the receiving end. UFC 208 was supposed to be legendary, but it ended up being memorable for all the wrong reasons. Most fights went the distance. The New York Commission had a rough time with some questionable judging, and the main event's officiating was less than stellar. UFC 208 had more twists and turns than a roller coaster ride. On February 11th, 2017, New York was set for the fight between Holly, the preacher's daughter, Holm, and Germaine, the Iron Lady, Durandamy. This wasn't just any old brawl. It was for the UFC's inaugural Women's Featherweight Championship. Now hold on to your seats because here's where things get messy. The fight went the distance, with Durandamy edging out Holm in a nail-biting decision, scoring 48-47. But here's the thing. If it weren't for one crucial factor, the outcome could have been way different than what it was. At the end of both the second and third rounds, Durandamy let loose with a flurry of strikes after the bell had already chimed its final ring. But did Anderson put his foot down? Nope, just a measly warning. Imagine if he'd take a point for those sneaky moves. Holm could have won the title right then and there. But he didn't, and Durandamy ended up winning. So while Durandamy walked away victorious, it's hard not to wonder what might have been if the referee had done what he was supposed to do. Wrapping up this list, let's not forget referee Yves Levine, who had a not-so-great moment during the Matt Brown versus Pete Sell fight with a late stoppage. He's just one of the many referees who've had their fair share of slip-ups. In UFC history, there's been no shortage of awful late referee stoppages, but this one stands out as possibly the worst. It all went down at the welterweight showdown between Matt Brown and Pete Sell at UFC 96. Referee Yves Levine let the fight go on way too long, leaving Sell to eat unnecessary shots. To add insult to injury, Levine seemed to change his mind mid-fight, leaving both fighters confused. In the first minute of the fight, Brown threw a barrage of punches that sent Sell falling to the canvas, making it seem like Levine would step in, but then he hesitated. In a strange turn of events, Levine seemed to change his mind mid-action, yelling, "Go, go, go!" as Sell struggled to stand up. It was surprising as referees can change their minds after making a call. Despite being clearly done, Sell couldn't withstand Brown's onslaught, and crumbled under more strikes. Even Brown seemed shocked that the fight wasn't stopped sooner. Finally, Levine intervened, but only after Brown delivered 2 more brutal punches that bounced Sell's head off the mat. It was a frightening and bizarre end to the fight, all thanks to Levine's outrageous mistake. Which of these mistakes do you think is the worst? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and before you leave, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Octagon Rivals so you don't miss the next ones.